All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you.
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Good evening, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts.
I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa. And I just realized, even though you and I were talking for like 5 minutes before this podcast started airing live, which if you're not watching live and you're only listening, come watch us live. That way you can interact with us. Like Mr. Frank Kowalski, who's already on and commenting. Hi, Frank. How you doing?
Good to see you, man.
Always. We are yin and yang today.
Oh, we sure are.
Yeah,
Look
we've
at
got
that.
baseball tees, and I've got my my Shiver right here. You can see it, my Shiver baseball tee, which you can get at Tee Public, and it's got black sleeves and white torso, and your
my
black torso.
My Danny flag. It's a smash the alt-right, not to get too political, but it is smashing a swastika there. And yeah,
listen, it's not political. It's just logical.
Yeah, that's just logical. Exactly. Indiana Jones was in a political movie, and he punched Nazis all the goddamn time.
Yes, because violence is only ever okay if it's punching Nazis.
Exactly.
Well, not only. Well, let's not get into that. Fuck Putin. Okay, so we are here today to do something that has been a long time coming since the Shiver reboot, since Shiver season 2, and that is to discuss a zombie movie. I don't know how this happened. I feel very badly about it.
It was one of those things, we just started talking about stuff, and like it was when we were discussing like potential artwork for maybe some new merch, which if you, like you said, you can head to Tee Public and find our merch. But and we started talking about maybe doing something up that says zombies in a podcast, and we're like, we've never done a zombie movie. And we realized, so we immediately we're looking at the calendar for this month, trying to find the best place to fit it in, and here we are.
Yeah, and I think we kind of decided we were going to go with something classic, right? So it was clearly going to be George Romero. I mean, the guy redefined what zombies were with his 1968 classic Night of the Living Dead. I mean, prior to that, a zombie in movies was someone who was being controlled by someone else. Very similar to like a voodoo zombie, right? So this was like the flesh eater, the ghoul, right? Very different. And we bounced some ideas back and forth, whether we were going to go with night, dawn, day. And we went with day. And I think that is really the right place to go, because night is the classic. Dawn is probably the one that is most discussed, I think,
right,
which leaves day as not necessarily a redheaded stepchild, because there are others in the series. Land is a continuation,
yes,
and a really good one at that.
And from what I understand, Land is actually what Romero wanted to make when he set out to make Day. And budget constraints, they were like, yeah, no. And they kind of reworked it into Day. And then once there was more, pull to the name George A. Romero and more money in movies, then they made Land of the Dead. But that was kind of originally what he wanted to do with this, like this big sweeping thing.
Yeah, he often referred to his original Day of the Dead script as Gone with the Wind, but zombies. And I'm like, fuck, I'm here for that, man. And there was actually an unfinished novel that he was working on at the time of his death. And it has since been finished and published. and that kind of has the scope, I think, of what he was going for in Day of the Dead. As it stands, however, Day of the Dead serves as a really interesting final chapter to a trilogy. I don't know that he had any intention of making a fourth entry in the series,
Right.
much less rebooting it the way he did with Diary of the Dead and then following that up with Survival of the Dead. But it also is a really solid standalone piece. And so I guess right out the gate, as we discuss what I think is probably the least discussed in the original trilogy, how does this succeed or fail on either front? As the final chapter in a trilogy, looking at it as part of the quadrilogy that would become, the original 4 films,
Right.
and on its own.
So when I sat down to watch this movie, I sat down and I was trying to remember. I knew I'd seen this before, but it had been a while. So I was trying to kind of backtrack and think about who I was watching it with, where I was living. Kind of landed on, it's been about 16 or 17 years since I'd seen
quite a bit of time.
Since I'd seen this. And I'm going to be just kind of 100% straight up honest with you. When we decided on this one, there was part of me that was really excited because I knew it had been a while, but there was part of me that was I was really kind of frightful of how this episode was going to go because I know what a special place this movie has in your heart. And I remembered thinking that it didn't come anywhere close to touching Dawn. So I kind of flushed all that from my brain and I was like, I'm going to go with this with fresh eyes. I'm a much different person now. And this movie, I think, very, very much benefits from the multiple watch and from the time to let it settle in. Once this movie, there's a lot of weird things here that on a first watch you're just are jarring and can kind of, and I'm not even just talking about the gore. I'm not talking about some other things we're going to get to. Some things about this movie that are just very jarring and can take you out of the experience on your first watch. But as you get back into it and now being more familiar with the genre and with what different, producers, directors, filmmakers set out to do, this movie, man, it found a really special place for me in here, dude. Like it ended up, I could not believe it was. I mean, it wasn't a full 180 because I wouldn't say I ever disliked it. But man, I was surprised at how well this worked because I was no longer expecting it to be a continuation of Dawn of the Dead, which is always that trap that a sequel falls into. Whether or not it's obviously a direct sequel, but it's a different movie. And you always fall into that.
It definitely
moment.
Doesn't tread the same waters,
right?
Thematically,
and so you always tread those waters where you're looking for pieces of the movie before it. And on first watch, it's real easy to not see the pieces of Dawn of the Dead that are in this. I feel like I picked up on a couple more this time. But
there's definitely some connective tissue there.
Yeah. So as kind of if we look at it as an end cap to the trilogy, I think that it works really, really well in scope because we gradually saw more and more of the world becoming zombified. And so it works real well on that aspect. It does a good job of kind of bookending if that were to be the end of the trilogy, because, it does. I possibly have a happy ending. I've got some ideas, but it possibly has a happy ending. So, you get somewhere with that. Honestly, I think it serves best as a standalone film, though. I think that if you just kind of look at this as, okay, it's a George Romero film, I know what I'm in for, but you don't think about it being just the continuation of Night and Dawn. You're just like, all right, I'm just in this for this movie. I think that's where the beef of this movie is to be found, is if you're just looking at it for just this movie. I think that's where it stands the strongest.
I agree. And I think that each entry into this franchise is kind of the same way, where even though there is an evolution of the zombie, which you can track, and it's actually a really great evolution of the zombie.
Yes.
Going from this like mindless killing machine in that first movie to something that has an idea of its past life
Yes.
in Dawn of the Dead. There's this conversation that happens. Why do they keep coming back to the mall? And it's because consumerism was such a big part of their life that they feel the need to go back there, even though they don't understand why.
Right. It's like it's like a primal urge, like feeding at that
Right.
point.
Yeah. Kind of like how animals are born with, internal compasses, and they just know how to get around in the forest.
Right.
So, Day of the Dead kind of takes that idea of there is something encoded in our minds, the things that were important to us in life carry over into death. And it amps that up even more because we see that with Bub. We see that his life, although he's dead, still persists.
Right.
His military background is there. That he knows how to shave, that he knows how to use a phone, that he reacts to music. I mean, it seems, which is kind of like the thing where, yes, it works best on its own, but when you start looking at the big arc,
right,
like that makes a lot more sense. If you watch this movie by itself, you might think it's a little ridiculous.
Yes.
And then if you haven't seen any of the previous movies and you just jump to Land of the Dead, where you have a zombie like Big Daddy, who like
works
organizes.
At a gas station.
Yeah, he works at the gas station. Like we see him, trying to put gas into the cars, because it's just against Dawn of the Dead, just kind of doing the routine that you were doing. But we also see him able to organize zombies and like basically unionize the zombies, yes. Right? And fight against the 1%ers. That is talking about smashing the alt-right.
God, man.
So that's an extension of what we already saw in Day of the Dead. So it's this incredible evolution of the zombie that we have going on here. Each movie has its own tone, yes. And each movie has its own commentary on what is going on societally, politically, economically at that time. And what's really interesting to me is that a lot of what this is commenting on that's going on in the mid 80s with that ultra conservative movement that was going on with Reagan in the White House, we see a lot of that still going on today.
Right.
And the movie is maybe even more important today than it was in 1985 when it was released.
And I do think that's one of the biggest things that made when, seeing this movie at, like I said, I was like 19, 20, I think, maybe 21. And so seeing this movie then, politically, your brain for the most, I don't know, 21-year-olds now, they seem to know a lot more than I did when I was 21. But like my 21-year-old brain, there was no concept. I was a nihilist at 21. Like tomorrow didn't exist. I didn't care about the government. And so, now it's like, in my late 30s and having just lived through the Trump presidency and seeing how tribal things have gotten, like now I watch that play out in this movie. And like I said, there are some things that are jarring, right? It's like, God, there is some serious overacting going on here, but it works and it makes sense.
We'll get to the acting because we are going to talk about characters. Yeah. And this is something that I agreed with Neri when we initially spoke about this movie, when George Romero died. We, if you want to go back a couple years, I'm not sure what the episode number is, but we do talk about Day of the Dead. And Neri was very critical, specifically about Joe Pilato as Captain Rhodes. And as the years have passed and I've seen this movie more and more. At that point, I had only seen Day of the Dead maybe twice. Now I've seen this movie. I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen it, because there was something about it that kept bringing me back to it. And I think that in such a high stress situation that these people find themselves in, the fact that no one actually was murdered by another person until Logan dies is actually, I think, kind of amazing. So that everyone is at 11, I see that.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
think of what Thanksgiving dinners have been like in the last 6 years.
Yep.
Where everyone is shouting at each other because that guy's a Democrat and that guy's a Republican, and they can't be in the same room together anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And everything goes back to this idea that you're wrong, no, you're wrong.
Yeah, and like you said, when we get to the social commentary and stuff, like that is definitely where this movie stuck a little bit harder for me this time around.
Yeah.
So, all right. So so like we said, it's the end of a trilogy kind of originally. I also saw that apparently this was part of a deal that he signed where he had to do movies and one of them had to be a sequel to Dawn of the Dead. Like this movie came out of the deal that also brought us Night Riders and Creepshow. So that
it is.
So I thought that was interesting. But so when we're looking at this, well, what we get out of this story is this really claustrophobic, very, very, very Romero there. We get this claustrophobic idea, but we get it a different way. We get it down in a cave, and we get more elements to the story as things keep evolving. So we've got the us versus them storyline. We've got the, everything's always going to kind of find a way to keep going. Just when you look at this story for this movie and comparing it to the first two, like, how do you feel about
it? Before I get to that, I do want to mention here Kowalski's comment. He says Romero wanted the movie to stay unrated, and because of that, they had the budget drop from $7 million to $3.5 million. I have read that before, and that is the reason why we don't have the Gone with the Wind zombies, and we have Bub. Instead.
And we've got Bub, yeah.
And I think it's better for it, to be honest. Each of these movies is claustrophobic in their own way, which is really interesting. And I'm not sure if Romero is trying to say something with that, because he's the type of guy who admits to never putting as much thought into writing his movies as people think he does.
I love that. Like there's an amazing sense of self that comes with being like, man, that is so awesome that you got that. Not at all what I intended, but I fucking love it. And I kind of wish that I had been thinking along those lines. Like there's a great self-awareness to that, to be able to admit that instead of just being like, oh yeah, totally what I meant.
There's I think it was in this one documentary, because I've seen a couple George Romero documentaries, but I think it's in one called Document of the Dead, that he talks about how there's this one particular critic who always finds the most interesting things to say about his movies, and that his critical analysis of these movies is they're amazing. And he's picking out things that he never considered when he was writing them. And that makes him wonder if somewhere like in his subconscious that was going on.
Right.
So Romero often will tell you that, like, for example, Night of the Living Dead, it really doesn't have anything to do with racism. Yet that's what just about everyone picks up on.
Right.
So this story, it's very difficult to watch this movie and not immediately pick up on the like ultra conservatism and the broadening of the military that's going on in America at that time in the 1980s. We're coming off of an era of liberalism with President Carter in office, and President Reagan is, swinging the pendulum to the other direction. And so we have this story that is basically, imagine if the military was in charge.
Right.
And I think that that's a great setup, because it's entirely different from what we see in Night of the Living Dead, which is no one's in charge.
Correct.
Right. And Dawn of the Dead, which is where we're in charge.
Yes.
And that great struggle for power between the scientists and the soldiers is really what's at the heart of this movie. There's so much that's going on here, and for a movie that's under 2 hours long, or just about 2 hours long, I mean, there's an awful lot in here. Yeah. And he dives deep into everything. How he manages to really explore so much story in such a small amount of time is incredible, because he really does explore side stories, personal stories, all within the bigger story. We do get, for us Floridians, Fort Myers, Florida is where the opening scene takes place.
Right.
The very famous, the dead walk here, newspaper,
zombie alligator.
Zombie alligator. One of the greatest zombies of all time, Dr. Tongue. Comes out.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so fantastic. My son was around as I was putting this movie on, and he goes, "Is that man's lower jaw missing? And did his tongue just flop out of his mouth?" I said, "Yeah, it did." He was like, "Oh, okay, cool." He's got a weird sense of
he's your son
of humor. Yeah, he's my son after all. So there I think is a really interesting story here where you mentioned us versus them, but it is kind of an us versus them, because it's who are you in this scenario? You get to decide, because zombies, military, and scientists get almost equal share of this story, and every one of them has pros and cons.
Right.
The very first time that I saw this movie, I saw the military as the bad guys. And let's not make any, mistake here. I still see them as the bad guy.
Right.
However, even more than the zombies. However, there's a scene where Rhodes did kind of get to me, where he's talking about how, they don't have enough equipment. They don't have enough time. They're running out of bullets. His men are the ones that are dying. What is he supposed to do?
Right.
He's a man like on the edge of his fucking rope. Like, he's got no idea how to handle this situation, and he's just trying to keep his men alive. It's actually a pretty good leadership position to say, like, we're fucking done.
Right.
We're packing up and we're leaving. We don't need to protect you anymore. Like, there's no government, there's no support. This is not what we signed up for. We're getting out of here.
Yeah.
If we could have done that in Nam, how many lives would we have saved? So I understand him being at 11 when he's shouting at the top of his lungs, I'm the one giving orders around here. There's overacting, maybe.
Right.
But is it severely overacting? I don't know. And it's because the situation is so tense. It's more tense than Dawn of the Dead. It's more tense than Land of the Dead. The only one that comes close is Night of the Living Dead, because of how claustrophobic this is. And I think this is even more claustrophobic than Night of the Living Dead, because there is no sunlight. There's no outside. There's no nothing. It's rock walls from pretty much like 10 minutes in until the one scene that we see Miguel go back up.
Right.
And that is terrifying, that we don't even control the surface anymore, that we have to live underground. And are we even really living? there's a great line in this movie, and I think that this movie has the best lines. It's the best written dialogue, narrative, you name it. This is the best written of all his scripts, and it's just after the fight that they had in the mess hall. Yes sir, fuck you sir. I love that line.
Yeah.
John turns to Sarah and he says, "That's the trouble with the world. People have different ideas about what they should do with life." And that is at the very heart of what this movie is, because even though it's a it's scathing commentary on the alt-right, it's scathing commentary on this like neoconservatism, it's also saying we're not sitting down and talking.
Right.
We're not trying to understand the other side. Sarah's so convinced that her research is the only thing that matters, that she's not taking into consideration the lives of the military that are allowing her to do this research.
Yeah. There's a lot. There's so much to the story. And it's funny because, we talk about it being claustrophobic, and it is, but it's claustrophobic at a scope and a scale that's weird to consider claustrophobic, right? Like, some of the scenes that I felt the most uncomfortable in were those mess hall scenes, and that is arguably the biggest area, the biggest set in the movie. But everything is so well positioned that you're made to feel so tiny. Like the thank you sir, fuck you sir scene. Like, that camera doesn't move. We just watch them walk off to like this pinpoint of a door. Yeah. And you feel so tiny that even though you're in this huge space, it feels claustrophobic. You're constantly reminded of how much space there is within these caves, but knowing that there's no escape from them is terrifying. Speaking of terrifying, I have seen the original. I've seen the original trilogy, and I've seen Land of the Dead. So let's call that a quadrilogy, right? I've seen all four of those. There is only one time in the history of I honestly think there's only one moment in the four of those movies that I ever thought I almost shit my pants, and it was this one at the very beginning when those arms shoot out of the wall when she's looking at the calendar.
What a great jump scare.
That is hands down the best jump scare in all Romero movies. That thing blows me away. So, and now, like I said, 16, however many years removed from it, completely fucking forgot, and it got me again. So just speaking of terrifying, that for jump scare wise, probably is just the most insane thing. But when I look at the story of this movie, I love that there's this idea presented by Dr. Frankenstein that at the core of the brain, right? That's the last thing to decay. And so that is where the basics of what made these zombies human exist, and that's what's going to take the longest to go away. And so they're living where that's all that they have. What's amazing about this story is what we get is this idea of these people that are still alive accessing that part of their brain and it becoming the only thing they have to hang on to. We've got these military guys who, I mean, they seem to have decent amounts of rank. They know what they're doing to an extent. So they must not have been awful at being in the military. I don't know. Maybe Rickles and Steele were always like that. But
the fucking Abbott and Costello of this movie.
It's so great. So like they're another one that I'm
all throwbacks have big dicks.
Oh my God. When we get to characters, but goddamn, like they were ones I couldn't stand the first time around, and this time I was like, yes, more Rickles and Steele, please. So good. But so everybody kind of, and so we've got Dr. Frankenstein, and at the core of him is this idea that everything in the brain is science. Everything in the brain, and so if the brain is firing, then the science must work the same. And so there is a way to train. He condition and control are the words that he keeps using, because to him, at his core, he understands the human brain. And if the brain is firing, he turns General Cooper into literally just a brain attached to a body, like completely removes face, everything, but is showing that the brain still works. And if the brain is firing, then there's something there.
Yeah.
And so we get these scientists who want to boil it down to that. And then we get these military guys who want to boil it down to like, we're in control, rank and file, order saves the day. And so that's how they view everything. That is their one lens. And then you get the two guys, the Irish guy and the Jamaican guy, right? It's like, hey, they've got the accents. They're the offshoot, and they're the guys who are like, yeah, we don't fucking care. Like we're here to
they have their paradise
job.
and
I got my spot in the bunker that looks like a bungalow. I got a flask.
The Ritz, right? They call it
the Ritz. Yeah, I've got and the other guys, I got a flask. It's always full of whiskey. Like this, we're good. Like
Jesus,
we're getting
Mary
by.
and Joseph.
Yes. Just survival. That's what was at the core of them, was like, make life worth living. If the only thing worth living is to drink every day or to have your little piece of paradise in the bunker, then you've got
something.
Right. Then you've got something.
Yeah.
And so all of these people were boiled down into a very two-dimensional persona. And what that gave us was a very three-dimensional character that we were then allowed to watch and break down and kind of pull apart. And the story evolved around how they did or didn't evolve.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's amazing is what we talked about at the top, and it's that constant evolution of what is a zombie. Mm-hmm. And when we get Bub, man, you get this idea of a zombie that can be not just conditioned and controlled, but that has memories. And that's what ends up leading to the most fascinating elements of this story, is this idea that maybe everybody's a little bit right. Like the army, they've got some ideas, and yeah, order can save the day, and it has its place. But also the science of the fact that if the brain is firing, then it works. That's what we see happening. And so you watch these bits of kind of grandiose ideas play out over the course of an hour and 40 minutes in this story. It's easy to look at a storyboard for this movie and say that nothing happens in the story. But when you actually kind of rip apart all the scenes, you see so much growth out of these characters that are presented as two-dimensional, which is bizarre, but the story forces that on you in a way that I don't think many people are going to pick up on their first watch. And that's what got me this time, was the fact that there was a story there. I remember thinking as it kind of went on, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Like nothing happens. There's no story, but there is. And there's the story of how all living things keep changing, for better, for worse, dead or undead. Because what does he say at one point? He's like, I promise that he's still alive, or well, I guess I promise that he still exists, right? Is what he says, because they're not dead, so we use that word undead. They're not alive, but they exist.
He says they're us. They're us. Yeah.
And so because there's so much in that one part where Dr. Frankenstein is explaining the brain that completely fell by the wayside for me the first time I watched this movie. And that part of the movie is this amazing summation of like, here's what you're in for the next hour and a half. And that's what I took out of the story this time, was it was like all those things that just kind of seemed silly, they're all on purpose. And they all tell this amazing story of what people can become when society breaks down, and does it in an hour and 40 minutes to an extent as well as it took The Walking Dead 6-7 seasons to do.
I agree 100%. And that has always been my biggest point of contention with The Walking Dead, is that if George Romero in pick a fucking movie,
right,
can say as much, nay more, than one show can over the course of how many fucking seasons, and he can do it in an hour and a half or an hour and 40 minutes, always under 2 hours.
All right.
What the fuck does that say?
Yeah.
That what that says is that he's got a lot to say.
Yep.
He's got a voice, and the beautiful thing is that it's never heavy-handed. It's always subtle. The more you watch his movies, the more you fall in love with them, and the more you realize that this isn't simple. This is the thinking man's zombie movie.
Yes.
Like you and I have talked about this before. We absolutely love Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
It is a great example of an 80s horror movie. It is funny, it is gory, it's everything you want, but it is simple.
Yeah.
There's not an awful lot to it. This is totally different. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's character-driven story. He allows himself to speak and allows, in fact, all of the world to speak, because everyone is represented here through these characters. Everyone can watch this movie and find one character that they feel reflected in. And that's an incredible thing, where you can see yourself reflected in a movie and there's going to be a redeeming quality there. It may not supersede the negative qualities, but there's going to be something there where you're like, okay, I can see some of the good that's in this person. You know, even someone like Steele.
Yeah.
Like Steele's an asshole and Steele's a jokester, but when he was told to shoot Sarah, what did he do? He played it off as a joke. Right?
Yeah.
He's like, bang, you're dead. You know, and it wasn't until his life was threatened that he was like, okay, hang. And then you saw his entire demeanor change. He's like, I don't want to do this. He was almost pleading with her, right?
Yeah.
So we have, whether it be the soldiers, the scientists, the zombies, right? We have these incredibly well-defined characters, like you were just discussing. Are there any standout performances, standout interactions, standout relationships, anything that you feel like, damn, I need a comment on that?
So I started to talk about it a little bit when we were doing story. One of the biggest takeaways for me this time around was how important Rickles and Steele were to this movie. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you even referred to them as the Abbott and Costello of this movie, and that's absolutely what they're presented as. But what you get out of Rickles and Steele are these frat boy military stereotypes boiled down to just a bunch of dick and fart jokes, right? Like it takes this idea of the brainless infantryman and boils it down to so in your face that you realize how comical that is, like how just absolutely outrageous it is that this is the deepest level of some people. And so the first time around, I hated them. I was like, they're so stupid, and their voices their voices are so annoying, and it's so much all the time. But that was before I knew to look at Romero movies through the lens that I look at through them now. And what I get out of them is this idea that, yeah, they're a joke, but it's also that it is a joke that you might have somebody that this is the essence of their personality, that this is everything that they boil down to. They were scene stealers, and not in the bad way that I remembered them being scene stealers. They were scene stealers in the fact that they were the soldiers who were along for the ride, even though they didn't take very much of it seriously. But they were so brainwashed in that way that it was like, oh, whatever. We don't take this seriously, but this is what we were told to do. This is how we do it, right? And so you start to look at that through so many different lenses. And like we keep talking about, this movie feels more relevant now. The idea of this being a commentary on Reaganomics, and we're going to get to that and stuff, but it's just characters like that. It's like, man, yeah, you know what these guys are? These guys are QAnon supporters.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, everything's a joke, but also somebody in a position of power, even though the military is completely gone, it's dissolved. Somebody in a position of power has told them to think this way, so that's what they do. Mm-hmm. They were the ones who really stood out to me this time. And it was amazing. Like earlier I said, I didn't do a 180 on this movie, but I did an absolute 180 on Rickles and Steele because they became characters that were just incredible at what they were supposed to do. The other one for me is Dr. Frankenstein, right on the complete other side of the spectrum. This guy who there's science, science will rule the day. Mm-hmm. And this is a guy who thinks that he can break down everything in the world to a couple of electronic pulses that the brain is sending. And dude never gets flustered. Not until, right before he dies. He's right there. The tone that he speaks to Bub, and the one, oh my God, one of my favorite moments is they've got the one zombie. It's not Bub. I guess he doesn't have a name, but he's like chained up. And he flips the lights off. I know which scene you're talking about. Yeah. And he's like, now you sit here and you think about what you've done, and like flips the lights off on him. And he just, and like the zombie seriously has a, like, what the fuck?
He has a reaction.
Yeah, like there's a reaction. Like, no, wait, don't.
It's like, did you just put me in timeout?
Yeah, like, but it's like he's got that like real soothing dad voice, like that I wish I had. Like once I reach that point, my voice is not soothing, right? Mm-hmm. But he's got like this great soothing dad voice where it's like, yeah, the zombie's like, well, you put me in timeout, but maybe I deserved it. I guess I'm gonna think about it and think about what I did. And you're right. He's
the only one that can go toe to toe with Rhodes.
Yeah. And opposite reason, which is amazing.
For the total opposite reason. And Sarah says this. No, not Sarah. Dr. Shit, what's his name? John Amplis's character. Dr. Fisher. Dr. Fisher, yeah. He says, that Frankenstein is safe because he can talk circles around Rhodes.
Right.
And you see that. I love the scene where he sits down and he says, excuse me, and everyone says, excuse me. Will there be food?
Yes.
It's like this, and he's like, what are you talking about food? He's like, because we need to eat. He has such a logical reason for everything, even in the midst of this totally illogical world that they're living in, even with this illogical research that he's doing. It's kind of crazy, but he sells it. He's so damn good. And Richard Liberty, the actor who played Dr. Frankenstein, he was. Have you ever seen the original Crazies?
No, I've only seen the Crazies remake. I have not seen the original Crazies.
So the original Crazies, which is a George Romero film,
right?
He plays a father whose daughter is infected with this virus, and he has an equally as subtle and paternal role in that movie. It's something he's really good at, but he plays it entirely differently. He's a ridiculously good actor.
With a very short filmography, like, because I was trying to figure out, I felt like his voice or something was familiar, but I went and looked, and there was nothing really on his filmography that I recognized. I mean, like I recognized, Porky's too, but I don't remember who he was in it. Mm-hmm. But there was, and maybe it's just because of that calming paternal feel that he has. He felt familiar.
Yeah. Actually, 1985 was his most prolific year. The Mean Season, Day of the Dead, and Miami Super Cops.
Right, none of which I've seen except for Day of the Dead. So.
Except for Day of the Dead, yeah. But the Crazies, Porky's 2. Porky's 2 is a solid follow-up to the original.
When you're looking at like teen sex romp comedies, yeah, Porky's 2 is a good sequel.
It's not bad. Yeah, it's not bad. He was also in Flight of the Navigator. Apparently, I haven't seen that in a minute, so I gotta
Dude,
rewatch that.
I'm 38. I'm pretty sure I was 5 or 6 the last time I saw Flight of the Navigator. Like, I could go for a rewatch on that one.
That sounds about right. It's been quite a minute for, and I remember watching it a lot when I was a kid. I had the VHS tape. I still have it in a box right here next to me. I've never gone back into that box. I don't own a VCR. Before I get to my comments, Mr. Kowalski says Lori Cardilli, who plays Sarah, is actually the real life daughter of the news reporter from Night of the Living Dead, and I think the best actor in the movie. I did not know that. That is really interesting. I have a different opinion on who the best actor is, although I would agree that she is up there. She's my second favorite in the movie. And he says Dr. Fisher is played by the same actor who did blackface during the police raid in Dawn of the Dead. Did not know that. I did know that there was an actor in blackface.
Yes, I knew that, but I did not know it was the same guy.
Yeah, but did not know it was him. He also is in another George Romero movie. Romero worked with a lot of the same people throughout his career. One called Martin, which is the only vampire movie that he did. And it is really interesting because you never quite know whether Martin, played by John Amplas, is actually a vampire.
I do know that movie. I do know that movie. There we go.
It's kind of similar to Renfield.
Yes,
where like it could be that he believes he's a vampire because he's killing people and taking their blood and drinking their blood, or is he just a fucking lunatic? So it's a pretty good movie. I haven't seen it in about 10 or 15 years. I had the DVD and lent it to someone, and I don't know where it is now. I wonder if the price is shot up on eBay. Maybe I should try to replace that. My favorite character, far and away, is John.
Yeah,
John for me represents everything that I hold dear to my heart. It's this sense of self-preservation, and in the face of making a decision, will make the right decision. But he's gonna try to hold off on that as long as possible.
I mean, he's a separatist.
He's a separatist, yeah, and ultimately, it's just he's going to look out for himself, and that's something that I understand, because at the end of the day, I'll do whatever I need to do to survive.
Yeah,
and if that means siding with these military guys so that I can live, I mean, at least I'm alive. Why did he sign up for this if he doesn't believe in it? There's that great scene at the Ritz, in the backyard of the Ritz, where they've got he talks about all of these records that they have, the census and all of these books on economy, and he goes, and it doesn't mean anything. And I get the sense that he never truly cared about this stuff in the first place.
Right.
So what exactly it is that he's holding on for, I think, is never really clear. And that's part of what makes his character so interesting. Him and Billy. What are they holding on to? And I think that what they're holding on to is life itself. They're living for living's sake. And that's a beautiful thing, where we understand that it is so precious to be alive that to give in would be a tragedy. That we continue to fight because life is beautiful,
right?
And we see that there's no hatred in him towards the soldiers, and if there is, he controls it really well. He seems to have a respect for all people, whether it's Captain Rhodes or it's Sarah. He has this sense of, you matter because you are alive. He will go to whatever lengths he has to go to keep Sarah and Billy alive at the end. Right. And we see that moment where he knocks out Rhodes, he takes his revolvers, and he's about to shoot him in the face. And there's that realization in his eyes, I won't turn into you. I refuse to take your life. Because even if I am leaving you here and sentencing you to death by doing that, I'm giving you a fighting chance. It's kind of that, reminds me of that line in Batman Begins. I am not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you.
Right.
Sort of thing. And that, I think, is so realistic. Oftentimes in movies, we get this like fairy tale thing where the hero is perfect, and John is not perfect.
Right.
But John is human. And I think that his portrayal is so realistic. It's so damn good. Just like Billy. Billy gives us this incredibly honest thing. You know, like, even if what you have to live for is alcohol,
right,
you have something to live for, you know, because that one drink is going to taste good. And so keep living for the whiskey, keep living for the smoke, keep living for whatever it is. But if it keeps you alive, that's a good thing.
Yeah. So I've got a question about John for you. Just about John kind of leading into this. I meant to bring it up when we were discussing story, and that is the end of this movie. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking an idea, and I'm sure that this is nothing new. It's just an idea that I had last night. Do you think that at the end of that movie, they're actually on an island, or do you think that when she opened that helicopter door, she was killed? And what we're presented with at the end of that movie is like her afterlife. Because that cut is instantaneous.
It is.
She's attacked, and then all of a sudden she wakes up on a beach, and it's idyllic. It's picturesque. And John's out there fishing, just living his life, exactly what he said he would do. You know, I'll just soak up some sun and live what I've got left. And it happens a split second after she's attacked in the helicopter. So is your belief that she got the zombie out and that they actually flew off and did this? Or are we presented with an afterlife image of what Sarah has?
I think that part of what makes this movie so interesting is that it is so nihilistic. It is so dark. But I think it does have a rather optimistic ending.
Right.
I don't think that she opened up that helicopter door and saw zombies in there at all. I think that what really happened is they got into that helicopter and left.
Right.
And if you talked about that jump scare at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
That cut is immediate.
Yes.
And she like, it's jarring the way that she wakes up and she's like, and she just, you know, kind of gasps for breath. We see the same thing happen later on in the movie when she's there with Miguel in her room. And I think that that's what happens there as well. She wakes up on the beach and it was a dream. The fact that she got to the helicopter and didn't survive.
Okay.
Right. In the same way that she went to her calendar and didn't survive.
Right.
And then she wakes up and there she is surviving.
Okay.
Right. And so I do think that this has a somewhat optimistic ending. I think that John kind of predicts what's going to happen, where he and Billy and Sarah go off, find some, you know, paradise and tropical paradise, and they just start repopulating the earth.
Which was, you know, the plan at the end of Dawn.
Right. Yeah. And is it Gail? She has she's with child at the end of the movie. You know, so it is kind of you taking that a step further and saying, look, we do make it. We do have a chance. Whether or not 2 men and 1 woman is enough to restart all of humanity, I don't think so. Her poor vagina. But
plus, you can only get like 2 generations in before the whole thing is super fucked, right? Like, there's 2 of them. Like, since there's 2 fathers, like, at least the kids would only share like 50% of their DNA. So I'm going to give you 2 generations before it's all just one cesspool of DNA.
So, I mean, realistically, there's got to be other pockets of survivors out there. And we do see that in Land of the Dead, where there are survivors and there is a semblance of society that has been rebuilt. But and how effective it is, we don't know, because it doesn't really turn out so well for them. Kowalski says her X off the days on the calendar, while on calendar makes me think it's what's left of her is reminding herself how much time that little part of brain has still left till she goes full zombie. That's an interesting take on that. Okay. I never considered it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can get on board with that.
So as we sit here and we've now crossed from talking about story, the characters, into just ideas that we have about the movie. And like we've mentioned a couple of times throughout this, you can't have a Romero movie without looking at the idea of scathing commentary, social, political, economic. I'm sure there are probably people who have actually received their master's thesis on breaking down the consumerism presented within Dawn of the Dead, right? Like these are things, the aggressive take on violent racism presented in Night of the Living Dead. These are all things that even apparently George A. Romero doesn't necessarily say he wrote in. These are all just givens when people are talking about these movies. So when you look at the commentary that we are given here in Dawn of the Dead, and we've kind of hit all around it, how do those punches land, and how relevant do they feel in 2022?
So as an 80s baby, but a 90s child, my knowledge of the 80s is mostly secondhand. I have very few firsthand memories of the 80s.
Right.
And you're only a few years older than I am, but I assume it's pretty much that way for you as well.
Pretty much the same. Like sometimes I kind of lean back on some of my earliest memories based on like being in school. Like I kind of remember first grades. That would have been like late 89. Like I feel like those are some of the earliest things I remember. So yeah, most of my memories too are 90s.
Yeah, like I remember being really excited about Batman in 89. And I would have been, almost 3 years old at that point. So I was really young. I remember the first time I played Super Mario Brothers, which was coincidentally the same night I saw Batman. Thank you very much to my cousins for giving me a great night that night. What I know about Reagan's presidency, subsequently leading to the upping of our military presence all over the world, the upping of our military budget, destabilizing governments in South America and Central America. Our military presence around the world was significantly higher than it had been before, even considering the fact that we had basically had a military presence somewhere in the world since 1942.
Right.
Because almost as soon as World War II ends, we get into Korea, and almost as soon as Korea ends, we're in Nam. So we have this increased awareness of our military. We have this swing to the right of the political spectrum after President Carter and his presidency. And I think a lot of people were afraid of the ramifications of that. I grew up in a city. Miami is, I think, and the community of Cubans down here in particular tend to be, pro-Republican, pro-conservatism, and particularly pro-Reagan. They talk about Reagan as a god, almost. And he is, indeed, looked upon as the father of, modern republicanism. It wasn't until I got a little older and started reading about Reagan for myself where I was like, you know what, I'm not sure I like this guy. And so I can totally understand the fear that a lot of people would have had about the direction that our country was headed in at that time, and the extreme conservatism that was going on there, which we would not see again until 2015 when Trump is running for president. And there's a large portion of Americans very upset with this sort of like string of liberalism that had been going on in the United States. So I think that all of this commentary on like this is what it would be like if we allowed the military to continue to grow, what it would be like if we were under the thumb of this authoritarian leader where more and more of our rights are taken away, and the purpose that we serve is at their whim,
right,
is one that is just as relevant today as it was then. You think about the fact that a year and a half ago, a militia stormed our Congress and tried to stop the certification of a presidential vote. Like that's the kind of thing that this that in any direction, alt-right, alt-left, you name it, when there's an extreme and there's no discussion between these two people, you get that sense that shit's going to go down. We're seeing it right now in Ukraine when you have a leader that's so hell-bent on doing it his way. It's his way or the highway. It doesn't matter what you want to do because I'm looking out for me.
Right.
Is there anything positive in what Putin is thinking? Is there anything in his mind that he is in fact protecting himself? I don't know. Maybe he does feel like NATO has been, pushing in on him and threatening him and his people. And in his mind, maybe he is that, just leader who's standing up for his people.
Right.
But if I'm a Ukrainian, I'm not looking at it that way. And ultimately, I think that's what we see here in this movie is this commentary of like, Rhodes might see himself as the savior of his people and he's standing up for his people, but you can try to have a conversation with this guy and it's not going to work because you got to be willing to sit down and listen. And he's not willing to sit down and listen.
Right. So I agree with everything you said, and I'm going to take it to I'm going to take what you said and kind of go in a different direction with it. So bear with me here. I'm about to put on my teacher hat for a minute because I fell deep into kind of an idea that I had blossoming as I watched this. So if you go, like I said, bear with me, teacher hat here. In 1939, a sociologist named Norbert Elias wrote a book called The Civilizing Process. And what came out of this was Elias argued that Western culture developed out of people's increased emotional control, a greater restraint of their spontaneous feeling. So these this idea of self-repression created what we now call civility. And civility became synonymous with the idea of a society and a culture that could function. And we came up with this idea of a civilized society. What we get in this movie is when society reaches a point where that self-repression no longer holds any water, therefore civility completely and totally breaks down. When you reach a point in society where suppressing your basest instincts becomes derogatory towards your probability of survival, then that is when civilized society breaks down. And what we get in this movie are a bunch of characters who no longer find any need for suppressing and repressing themselves anymore, because their lives could genuinely be in danger if they don't, in their minds, if they don't enact their basest instincts to the fullest, because they've reached a point where that is the only method of self-preservation that they have. And so what we get is a society that's completely broken down. There is no civility left. And so what we get out of that are tribes. We end up with 3 tribes in this movie: the scientists, the military, the separatists, all trying to survive in their own way. The military, like I said earlier, rank, file, order will save the day. The scientists, there is a method to all of this. We can break it down. We will figure it out. We will survive. And the separatists are, I'm just going to keep me alive. It becomes very tribal. Now, when we look at how that reflects on now, how that lesson works now to this day, I get that, like I said, I'm only in my late 30s. So I've got a decent amount of life experience. I've got a very small amount of life experience that matters in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, let's just say since I was 25 and I've actually paid attention to these things. So 13 years. But in that time, like you said, starting in 2015, this idea of me versus you has become such a flashpoint in American politics. And there is no other way. We've reached this point where now I'm no longer talking about the movie, just by the way. Now I'm talking about American society. We've reached a point where civility is almost non-existent on the highest levels of government, because it's no longer about suppressing things that are only important to you in terms of the greater good. We've reached a point where now you are just looking at everything through this one monochromatic lens, and it's black or it's white. And that's what this movie gave us almost 40 years ago. This is 1985, right? So 37 years ago, that was what this movie presented. And now that is what politics has become. That punch landed so fucking hard. Everything is so tribal now. Like, it doesn't even and I'm not even talking about the general public. I'm talking about actual politicians that are in these positions of power that only care about maintaining that power, not actually getting anything done and being civil with people who might be different. They've got to appease the people underneath them that voted for them, that are tribal, and put them into this position of power. So there is no civility left. To keep this super modern, if you have watched anything about the Supreme Court hearings that are going on right now, where they're trying to figure out if they're going to let this new judge in, it's just grandstanding at its finest. She has done less talking than anyone, because all of them are doing nothing but grandstanding, because there is no civility to it. There is no you talk, I talk, let's figure out whether or not we're going to make this work. It's I'm talking right now, so you're going to listen, because this is my opportunity to make my point. And that's what this movie did. I think that is what took this so far beyond what I saw in it all those years ago, because the idea of, and granted, it took zombies for it to happen here. All it really took for us was one maybe billionaire dickhead running and getting elected president, right? Like, it took one guy put into not just a position of power, but arguably the most powerful position in the world to convince everybody that this is okay. Mm-hmm. And so many people have broken down into this tribal idea. Yes, I am wearing an anti-flag shirt, and I have a lot of very extreme political, ideals, but I'm very civil about it. And I will sit down and I will talk with somebody. And as long as you are presenting your ideas in a way that I don't feel attacked, I will do the same for you. This movie presented an area where that couldn't happen. And society and politics as a whole has become that now. It's just amazing to me. It feels like it was like a portent of the future, right? It was like he could tap into something that we saw happening in the 80s, but didn't realize how extreme that shit was going to get. The raging against Reaganomics, like you said, my memories of the 80s, not that great. But my in-depth love of punk rock, that so much of it came from raging against Reaganomics, has led me to research a lot of that. And yes, there was a lot of it there, but it wasn't to the extremes that it is now. In punk was a bunch of 20-year-old nihilists raging against these things. Now it's the entire world just raging against each other. And yes, I'm guilty of it at times too, but not to the extreme that this movie presented of civility breaking down. Mm-hmm. But that's what's happened. And that punch, that social commentary, even if it's, like you said, even if it's not what Romero intended, that commentary doesn't just land now. It lands, I can only imagine it lands ever harder than it could have in the 80s, when it was just struggling against this neo-fascist military ideal, because now we're living that. We're living this neo-fascist military ideal where, yes, regular citizens in bulletproof vests with zip ties on their belts are storming federal buildings. Like, we're actually living that now. And so it just, like, when it was all said and done, that's where I walked away from this movie, and I was like, God damn, like, even there were a bunch of little faults about this, and I'm going to forgive damn near everyone, because that moment, watching this now, that commentary hit me harder than the consumerism, than the racism, than all of those other things that were glaring commentary in other Romero movies. That hits so hard now that I was flabbergasted. I was rewinding and listening to dialogue over and over again and going, 85, 2017, these same conversations are happening. And it was amazing. So there's my commentary rant.
It's all and a good one. It was. It all goes back to the fact that I think he took a different approach when he was writing this. There's more subtlety to this than there was in Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead is very over the top. Dawn of the Dead is very clear in its lambasting,
right? Just that music just constantly droning in the background. Like,
by the way, it makes a return.
Yes,
I don't know if you noticed it.
I did. Yes,
yeah, and so there's some of that connective tissue that goes back to Dawn of the Dead, but there is a subtlety here to the writing, which and the dialogue, which makes this movie beg for rewatching.
Yeah.
And the more you watch it, the more you pick up on it. I think you hit the nail on the head in every possible way here. And we could keep going.
Yes, we could. But we're gonna lighten it up a little bit now, because you're right. That's we do like to get in deep on these things, but before this just becomes a political lambasting of all things that aren't Day of the Dead, we're gonna move forward and let's lighten it up. Let's talk about from what is the heaviest part of the movie to what is arguably, not even arguably, let's just face it, to what is the most fun part of the movie.
Oh,
absolutely. And that is the special effects. This is not only Tom Savini pushing practical effects to the brink, but also Greg Nicotero. Those are two names that now people know. Horror movie fans know the names Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero. And it's the two of them working together to bring us brutally gory scenes that are unmatched in this series. I mean, what, Land of the Dead came out in like 2005, 2006. So 20
Something
years,
like that, yeah.
20 years separated. And this is still the goriest, most special effects laden one that we've got, especially practical effects.
Mm-hmm.
So just what do you love, man? How does it hold up? What was good?
I may end up eating my words one day because I'll end up watching some movie that actually makes me rethink this. But at this point, on March 23rd, 2022, at 10:21 in the PM, I believe that this is the best that special effects have ever done. Practical effects in any movie ever. I don't think that there is better makeup effects. I don't think that there are better kill effects, gore effects. What was accomplished in this movie is the very pinnacle of practical special effects.
Absolutely.
You wonder how this happened because it looks like a fucking snuff film.
Yes.
And that's part of what makes this movie kind of a difficult watch, because the first movie is surprisingly light on the gore. It's one of those movies very similar to the original Halloween and the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. People remember it being very gory, and it's not.
Right.
It's a lot of what's suggested that's there. The second movie, Dawn of the Dead, does up the gore factor, but it's almost comic booky in the way things are done. And it's a stylistic thing. That's what he was going for. This movie's very different. The violence is so real. It's so brutal. The only movie that comes close to this is a Craig Zoller movie called Brawl in Cell Block 99.
Oh, we talked about that one last week.
Did we? Okay, yeah. And also Bone Tomahawk. Those are the only two movies that I can think of.
Maybe it was after the show we were talking about it, but yeah, I do remember both of those being referenced.
We were talking about Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
Right. So we talked about Bone Tomahawk. Yeah. Those are the only two movies I can think of where the brutality of the violence and the practical special effects come close to this. And I think that Savini, who was already a master in his craft, I mean, with Dawn of the Dead, you've already cemented yourself as one of the horror masters. But then you come in and you do Friday the 13th, you do The Prowler, you do Friday the 13th Part 4, which ups the gore factor significantly. Yeah, you just saw this.
I just watched 10 of them in the past week and a half. I have watched 10 Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah. Hey, where's the corkscrew?
Yes.
Every time I watch this movie, I love the dialogue. I love the acting more and more every time, despite what people say about this being overacting. And yet what I look forward to is those last 15 minutes of the movie when all hell is breaking loose.
The feeding frenzy, man. It's a feeding frenzy at the end.
It is. I mean, it's, and yet for some reason to me, it never seems like torture porn. It's not like Hostel.
Right.
It's not, it doesn't make me shy away. I
Right.
want to watch it because I still, even though I've watched documentaries about this thing and I know how they did it because they've documented it, they've talked about it. I still wonder how the fuck does it happen? How does it look that good?
Dude, okay, like before the feeding frenzy, the one the one that I can't, let me not even say the one that stands out the most because they're also good. But before the feeding frenzy, the one that was just that I keep thinking back on is when they're in the lab, and there's the one zombie that sits up
And all his guts fall out?
and it kind of rolls to the side and just everything slides out, just viscera and like a stomach, and just everything just slides out and just plops down on the floor. And then Frankenstein just kind of, absentmindedly just drills the dude in the head, and he goes down. Like that juxtaposition of this is horribly disgusting and gory, and here's how I deal with him. Another day in the life. Like that was so good. But yes, just watching all that stuff fall out of what was obviously an actor part of it, at least, like set up, that it was just incredible.
There's I mean, you don't even have to go to the big effects like that. There's little things too that stand out. The scene where Bub is shaving.
Yeah.
There's like tiny little slivers of skin that come off of him. And I'm like, how the fuck are you doing this?
Yeah.
Like, how is that not cutting his own skin? How is he not flaying himself? And then to go back to the amazing Sherman Howard, the way it would have been very easy to go over the top with Bub. And he played it so perfectly.
The most understated character in the movie was the zombie.
Yeah, the most memorable character in the movie is the zombie. That's amazing, and that you can imbue emotions in a zombie is crazy. But that's another example of like the masterful quality of these effects, that something as simple as a zombie shaving is like,
right.
But how the fuck did they do it? And then to me, if I had to pick one, it's really difficult between Rickles and the soldier that gets it just before him. But I'd probably go with that guy, because the way that he's decapitated, and you see all of like the tendons and the ligaments stretching and snapping, right? And then the pitch of his voice goes up.
Yes.
As his voice box stretches, right? It's almost like when you tune a guitar, that string, as it gets tighter and tighter and tighter, the pitch goes up. That's exactly what happens there, because I have to imagine that if you did stretch someone's voice box out, that is the sound that it would make. And it is disturbing, and I can't look away. It's like a fucking train wreck, and every time I watch it, I wince and smile. It's one of those things where it's like, I can't believe you pulled this off. Rickles is a great one, to see his eyelid get ripped off and his fingers bitten off. I can't explain how it looks so real.
Like, there's a moment where during that final, I believe it's Rhodes, when he gets tackled down, and you're watching him go to the ground, and like you said, I can't explain it, because it definitely obviously still looks like him, the actor, but then a zombie like hooks him in the eyeballs and starts like pulling his head, and it's like, when did that switch from like a person to a special effect where you could gouge out their eyes and rip them up by their head?
I think that was Rickles.
Oh, okay, that was Rickles. Yeah, so that is the one where his voice goes up. But yeah, in that
it's an almost seamless cut.
Like you watch the fingers sink into his eye sockets before that happens, and it's just like, how did this happen? Like, that's the thing, right? Like, when you see a CGI effect. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, it looks cool.
It's a computer,
but it's a computer. I get it. That's how you did it. When you watch a low budget, when you're watching all those Friday the 13th films, it's like, yeah, I see how they did that. It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah. I
But
saw
get
the
how
string.
but I saw the string. I get it.
Yeah.
The special effects in this movie were flawless. Like I don't know. I don't know how the transitions were made between person and dummy that you ripped to shreds, or where an actor ended and a fake body began. It was incredible.
And the thing is, it'll never be topped because we have moved into an era of filmmaking where it simply isn't cost effective to do practical effects anymore.
Right.
And some directors like Craig Zoller, who I just mentioned, insist upon the practical effects, and the movie's all the better for it. But the fact of the matter is that we're not going to get special effects like this on any measurable scale probably ever again. So when I say that, on this day at this time, I'm saying that this is the best special effects I've ever seen. It would have to be a movie that came out in the past that I have not seen yet,
right,
that tops this, and I can't think of one. I seriously can't think of one. Another special effect that I think is just fantastic is the amputation of Miguel's arm.
Yes.
It's again another subtle scene. It's not a big one, but they reused an effect that they had kind of perfected in Dawn of the Dead, where that biker, was it the biker or the zombie? Yeah, the biker, who's Tom Savini. His name's Machete, right?
He loves to be a biker.
Yeah. Well, he's got the look, he takes his machete and he just whacks this one zombie in the face with it. And you watch and you're like, oh my God, they fucking hit that guy in the face with it. Because you see, see like the eyes move and the mouth go like, the mouth start to sag. It's like, that's a dude there. They didn't like just slam a machete into a dummy. They slammed a machete into a guy. And so when you watch how they did this, it's a machete with a cutout. And they actually filmed it in reverse. And then they just played it backwards. So they put the cutout over the guy's face. And then they film it being very aggressively taken away.
Oh.
So it's a brilliant effect. And that's how they did the amputation of Miguel's arm. So they placed the machete exactly where it needs to be on his arm. They pump the blood out. And then they very aggressively take it away. And then they cut it so perfectly, because you have to see his hand move.
Yes.
You have to see the fingers move to sell the effect, right? And it's a very subtle movement, but it lets you know that machete is on an arm that is currently attached to a real person.
Yeah. And
then they cut away to I don't know if it was John or if it was Billy, someone, and then they cut back, and now it's the dummy arm.
Yeah.
And that's the one that she flings away with the machete. And it's a brilliant special effect. And when you think about it, I mean, these are simple things, but executed on a level of perfection that makes you do a second guess. I mean, it makes you do a double take, and you're like, did they actually cut some guy's fucking arm off for this? Because I don't see his arm again the entire movie.
Exactly. Kowalski's chiming in here to say they used pig guts a lot, and for Rhodes' death, they didn't refrigerate the guts properly, so it all smelled extremely rancid.
Yeah. Did you know this, Daniel?
I did not.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew that they use pig guts because pig guts are the general analog for humans, but I didn't know they didn't refrigerate it and it all smelled bad.
There was some holiday. I want to say it was Thanksgiving. I can't remember exactly which holiday it was. And so the production had a break so that everyone could go back to their families and, do the holiday thing and then come back. Someone had either unplug the refrigerator that they were in, or it had lost power, something like that. But they pulled those guts out of the refrigerator, and apparently it smelled worse than you could possibly imagine. But it was the only guts they had left. And I mean, this was like one of the last things that they were going to shoot. So Joe Pilato being a professional is like, no, we're gonna do this. It was he says
they
the
used
worst.
the rancid guts.
Yeah, he said it was the worst experience of his career, but he says the reason why he sounds like he's like choking and suffocating to death as he tells them to choke on him is because he really was choking and suffocating. Like he couldn't inhale.
Oh my God. Well, and so, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of amazing things to be said about the gore effects here, because I agree with you. This falls in line with Jurassic Park, where it's like somebody made a deal with the Crossroads Demon to reach this level of perfection in special effects, like when they did. But one of the other things that really stands out for me about effects design is the amazing like cross section of society that we get represented in the zombies.
Yeah.
There's a clown in there.
Yep.
One of my favorites that I noticed this time that I didn't remember from before was there's a ballerina, but not only is she a ballerina, but she's like moving like on point. Like when she walks, she's like taking those like Swan Lake style steps. And I was like, that type of shit is so cool and feeds into that idea that is started in Dawn of the Dead, brought on in this, explored even further in Land of the Dead, which is there are certain parts of us that are just so important to us that they become ingrained. And so, but when you just look at the field of zombies, it's not just a bunch of people. It's a bunch of different types of people, which I thought was interesting. I mean, like I said, just the ones that stood out for me, I was like, there's a clown and a ballerina here. Like, okay, sure. So I think that those things don't get overshadowed by the gore effects. I think that they're made to be more subtle, but just as much fun. My favorite, when it was all said and done, though, man, was when she cut the zombie's head in half with the shovel.
Yes.
And then you get like that the top half of the head upside down with the eyes still
looking
like
around.
whipping around.
Yeah.
Loved that. Thought that was just genius. And I agree with you, man, because of the fact that where we are with practical effects, we're just never going to get something on this level again. It's absolutely incredible.
Jurassic Park, I think you're right, might be the only one that's on par with this. But it's a very different kind of special effect. They're not kill effects. They're creature effects.
Yeah.
And that's it's a different territory that you're working with there. But I think that is the pinnacle of creature special effects there.
Right.
I don't think it will ever be topped. I mean, and how they melded the CGI with the practical is just, I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
I do want to mention before we move on to ratings, something I did not put in our show sheet here, and I'm really sorry.
That's all right.
The music in this movie is out of fucking hand. I absolutely love John Harrison's score. John Harrison is a guy who has worked with George Romero a few times. His most famous score is probably the one to Creepshow. He's also a producer on many of his movies. This score is, I'm a big fan of synth pop, synth rock, synth wave. If it's got the word synth in it, I love it. And this is something that manages to be perfectly 80s, yet sound really modern today compared to what some of the synthwave bands today are doing. So it's like kind of prescient in its understanding of melody and timelessness, right? Because there's when you see the palm trees, there is almost like a Caribbean flair to the synthesizer,
right?
It's really interesting what he does with the music here, and I think John Harrison doesn't get enough credit for his music. I think he's a really effective composer.
I think that the music on this one was a little hit and miss for me. I did enjoy it for the most part. It was, I liked those moments like you're talking about, like when you've got the palm trees and it changed and it changed some there. It was but whether or not I felt like, whether or not I was like enjoying the music in that moment, I can definitively say that it always fit the moment. You know, like it was one of those things where it was where every once in a while I'd be like, but I get it, you know, like I understand why they went with that for the music right here. It wasn't, and part of that is, and I do know that part of that is that your love for synthwave is a lot deeper than mine. But I will admit that it was always extremely fitting, and like I said, and it was also perfect in the fact that it was so fitting, but for so much of it, it was such a departure from that, like I said, that muzak that was always kind of droning in the background of Dawn of the Dead. It was something new, and it was something that made sense in that. The other thing that I really liked about the way that the music was in this movie was the way it, this is going to sound weird because I was just watching it on TV, but the way it seemed to fill space made sense in this idea of the whole movie taking place inside caves. It was a movie. It was a movie that had physical volume, not just like volume hearing. It was a movie that literally seemed to, it was music that seemed to fill space. It was music that grew as the environment in the movie grew. And like that I thought was fascinating. Like the music is very different down in like the cave parts where they're fighting versus when they're in like the areas where they live, because it had different space to fill. And that I think is where I think that the synth pop, synth wave idea of this music was untouchable as a directorial and music decision, because that's what that music has the ability to do.
100%.
Yeah. So now we reach that point in the podcast where we're going to rate this bad boy. Now, if you are new to the podcast, or if you just need a quick reminder, we do want to let everybody know that we only rate a movie against itself. So we don't use stars, because that would rate every movie on the same scale. What we do is we create a unique rating system for each movie. And we had some ideas for this one. We had some wild ideas. But what we decided as just one of the most fun ones and one of the most unique ways that's only something that's going to relate to this movie is we're going to rate this out of a possible 5 Aunt Alice's. So, Dave, when you're looking at Day of the Dead, out of 5 Aunt Alice's, what do you give it?
On Alicia's.
On Alicia's, yes.
Alicia's, yeah.
Alicia's. Yeah.
I'm going for it, man. This is gonna get another 6 out of 5 on Alicia's for me. I think when I did this last time with Neri and Jeff, I think I gave it 4.5, maybe 5. And as I've gone watching it and appreciating it more, Dawn of the Dead was previously my favorite in the series, and that's kind of dropped down to number 2
right
in recent years, and this has risen to number 1. And it's for all the reasons that we discussed today. I mean, the social commentary is on point. Every time I watch this, I pick up something else. The special effects hold up so well. I mean, if someone were to tell me, hey, give me a zombie movie to watch, is there more zombiness in Dawn of the Dead? Absolutely. But when you get to see the zombie as a monster, man, this movie just blows every other zombie movie out of the water. I think that this is the very pinnacle of zombie violence. Turn off Walking Dead. Watch all 4 of the original Dead series. I mean, go ahead and watch Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead. They're pretty good too. I'm not going to go ahead and say that they're as good as, the original 4, but they're pretty good, and they've got that Romero flair to them. And I think that this movie is perfect for getting your zombie action. It's perfect for thinking about what is really going on and how it relates to your life. Who do you see yourself as in this movie? I think that there's a lot of that there. It invites you to think about yourself. And I think a movie that is ultra violent and a movie that is scary, genuinely scary, and so tense, and with such great dialogue and drama, and still invites you to think, where it's not just turning your brain off. You get that opportunity to turn it off at the end. Turn it off and just enjoy the violence. And some of those shots, there's, I would have loved to have seen Romero do like a bona fide action movie, because some of those scenes in the mine, where they're like just back to back and fucking ripping zombies in half with machine guns, like that was fucking great.
Yes.
I would have loved to have seen like a First Blood style action movie, survival thriller action out of him. I mean, this movie is perfect.
So I'm not going to go that high with it. And part of that is going to be because, as much as I did enjoy this last night, and as great as it's been doing this, I'm still not ready to replace Dawn with I'm still not ready to replace Dawn with this as my favorite of the Romero zombie movies, right? So I'm not.
And you are in the majority,
right? And so because at the same time, if somebody were to be like, hey, I would still recommend Dawn. It's a little bit easier to get behind. It's a little, it's a little bit easier to just digest, especially upon a first viewing. Right. So, but I am going to give it 5. I mean, which is still a perfect score. Let's face it. That's absolutely still a perfect score. I'm not gonna gold star this one yet. Right. I'm gonna go 5 on Alicia's. Because I don't have anything bad to say about it. And not only do I have nothing bad to say about it, but I feel like upon rewatch and upon doing this, that I also have the right arguments to shoot down the negative things that people will say about this. In my research today, I found out that Roger Ebert could not stand this movie. And so when I read through his review, I was like, I could combat a lot of the points that he says are negatives here, which I think is very telling of how good a movie is. And it's what takes something from beyond just being I like it to no, I genuinely think that you're wrong by thinking that this element X is presented poorly. There's an argument to be made about overacting, but I also think that the counterpoint to that argument is what we're presented with are basic caricatures of what these people are supposed to be. So they're supposed to be overacted. Everybody's on edge. Early in the movie, she says, you're exhausted, you're overworked. And he says, everybody's exhausted, and we've all been there where you've been working for, 5-6 straight days, and it's been one thing after another, and it takes nothing to set you off.
Yeah.
And that's just society functioning and working for 5 days. That's not an untold amount of time where you've been living with 12 or 13 other people in a bunker while zombies are constantly trying to eat you. So it's easy to say they're overacting, but I think it's harder and more difficult to step back and acknowledge that that's actually possibly a more accurate portrayal of what people would be like when put into this situation. So
just think about how angry people are right now for having to pay more for their gas.
Yeah. Think about
and that's just gassing up your car. I mean, that's not really, a life or death situation.
Think about the shit mood I was in when I had to spend 3.5 straight weeks locked in the house with my kids, and I love them more than my life. And I was just now, and I started smoking again. Like I needed something. And so this is being locked in a room. This is being locked in an area with people you don't even like, but that your survival might depend on them. Yeah. You're gonna be on edge, And so like I said, I'm not gonna gold star it, but I am gonna go 5 on Alicia's, because I do think that, and man, I did not think I was gonna get anywhere close to this. When I fired this up yesterday, I was like, I'm ready to watch this, but I'm worried because I know how much Dave loves this.
I'm ready to tell Dave why Dawn of the Dead is the best in the series.
And I was just like, man, I know Dave loves this one, and it is it's going to be a rough go when I'm just constantly like, yeah, but Don did this, did that better. But man, no, like it's, like I said,
They
like
really
Don,
are different movies.
I like Don more, but they're very different movies. And when we're just looking at it against itself, it's an absolute 5. Like it's so good. And yeah, like if nothing else, 3.5 of those 5 stars go to special effects because they're just so good. So yeah, I'm gonna let it ride at 5.
And so there you have it, sitting at 5.5 on Alicia's. I'm assuming the other half was eaten by a zombie.
Makes sense to me.
Is George Romero's 1985 Day of the Dead. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. We have gone on about half an hour longer than we typically do, which I think is a testament to how much there is to say about this movie. And we cut ourselves short, I think, in just about every category here. We could keep going on. We could do a part 2 where we revisit every single one of these topics and not say anything twice.
Agreed.
It's I mean, there's and this is true of just about every Romero movie. You take any one of his movies and you could sit here and, like you said, you could write a fucking dissertation about this stuff. So if you stuck with us the entire time, I see that somehow we have more viewers now than we did when we started. So thank you so much, especially to Mr. Kowalski for coming in and interacting with us. You too can interact with us if you watch live. Please make sure that you don't just stop here at Shiver. Check out some of the other podcasts that we've got on the Geek Bro Network. Check out Mount Geekmore, which both Daniel and I can be found on typically on Monday nights. Check out What's Up Bro, which usually records at the same time that we do on Wednesday. So watch us live and listen to their recording. Check out Comedy Fitness, A Dose of Ellie Seasons, a TV podcast, Kick Flicks, Crimacopia, our sister podcast, and The Behemoth within the podcast network. Better let me tell you,
yes,
where you can find friend of the show Ish on every week.
Also, make sure if you're looking for all of those, you can head to shiverpod.com, and that will take you to our section of the Geek Bro website. But then from there, you can get to everything else. Also, something that we do forget to mention, but Dave kind of talked about at the top, we've got merch with our amazing logo. And so if you head to TeePublic, you can do 2 different things. You can search for Geek Bro, which will take you to an area where you can access all of the Geek Bro show's logos, and then you can have them put on t-shirts, coffee mugs, pillows. I don't know. Maybe they make comforters. They've got all sorts of stuff that you can get our logo on.
All right, be cool.
That'd be cool. Or you can search for Shiver Podcast. That'll only bring you up ours. The most efficient way, though, is to head to TeePublic, look up Geek Bro. He's got the coffee mug. He's got the t-shirt. I've got a t-shirt somewhere. I will say this about TeePublic. They do run a little bit small. Maybe go up a size. I will say that as something to keep in mind. TeePublic does seem to tend to run a little bit small. So if you're going to order some, we'd love to see your pictures of that. So if you do have any Shiver merch, make sure you follow us on all the social medias at ShiverPod. Tag us. We'd love to share it. We'd love to have the follows. We try to let you know what's coming up next. We release a schedule at the beginning of each month. Last week, like I said, I would just get drunk at night and tweet about Friday the 13th movies. It happens. Yeah. But we try to have fun with our social media. We're trying to be more interactive. We're keeping an eye on maybe trying to do another live party. The last one kind of fell through. We got a lot in the works, people. We appreciate all your support. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, Fright Shiver.